Juno. She's going to be joining us a little bit late. My apologies to everybody. We do have a quorum. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. We can have time to one of these. And Jen, I see there's no work here. Yeah, you were going to do it. That appointment was canceled. Okay, great. We're going to keep you on the agenda. Great news. Right, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order again. Apologies for my tardiness on wasting everybody's time. But we'll go ahead and start off with the roll call. I'm Dave Rittenberg, Commissioner. Am I right?
My name's Laura Rains. I'm a commissioner.
Richard Mystrom, Commissioner.
Daniel Sager, Commissioner. And then we'll go in the room. Good one. Very pretty council. Flat.
Thank you, Dahl, staffer for the HHAND Commission.
And then we'll start on I see. We're just doing roll calls. I see Frederick Brown.
David, it's really hard to understand you on the Teams for some reason. Like when Laura spoke, it was clear, but for some reason where you're sitting is super garbled, so we can't really understand what you're saying.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Roll call online. So we can.
Wow, it's still getting real garbled. Maybe it's because maybe you need to stretch out those cords. It's just very garbled for some reason.
I can jiggle the cord. That's the extent of my
thing up. Just
No, it's better when you moved it away from those other things. I just think there's some interference that's making it really garbled.
That's not the microphone. It's on there.
Oh, all right. Has nothing to do with that thing.
Is this better?
No.
It's okay. It's not really, but I'm Thea. I'm with the mayor's office. Nice to see you guys.
Maybe
Brown, mayor's office.
online. That they can hear you better.
And Farina, you're there?
I'm sorry. So what I think I'm hearing is that we will probably need to work on the ability to have folks over Zoom because we are really, really pushing for people to participate in the HHAND Commission. And a lot of those people are going to be interested in attending online versus in person. So seeing that this is one of our technical areas that we'll need to work through, because if someone said something in the room, I didn't hear anything. The only person I can actually really hear very well is Frankie.
Okay. How about now? Is that any better, Farina?
That's much better. Thank you.
We figured it out. So, online and with Kelly.
Kenny Peterson, community member. Thank you.
Kenny. With Josh.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
Doesn't sound like it's any better.
Okay, that was better, David. But there's something about where you're sitting that is kind of making it break up a lot. But when other people talk, we can hear them.
You're saying it's me.
Sorry, David. I think it's just where you're sitting.
I'm just scoot down to the other end. With Josh. Want to just introduce yourself? And we have Michelle Baker. Hi, Michelle.
Hello.
Great. And then, Mr. Zula, are you there? You want to introduce yourself? All right. I think he's a community member and real estate agent. Okay. So with that, we can go ahead and move on to approval of the order of business. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? To approve. Any discussion on the agenda? I would ask, Alan, we have you on the agenda here for presentation on shadow setback in the subarctic intercity. But the that he gave us is reconnecting Fairview. So which one are you they're connected? They're connected. Everything's connected. Everything. All right. Everything is okay. So I don't think we need to make an amendment to the agenda there.
We do need a second for the motion we just had.
Can we get a second to
Oh,
approve the agenda, please?
Okay, that's cool.
Second. Any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, go ahead and approve the agenda. And move on to approval of minutes. Thank you, Frankie, as always, for doing such an amazing job with the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
And a second. Sorry. Second. The Minnesota review. Any discussion on the minutes? Going once. Going twice. Seeing and hearing none, minutes are approved. Moving down to item D, we do not have any action items. We can go on to informational items. And with that, I will invite our special assistants to the mayor, Tia, and Farina to give us your update. Thank you for being here.
And Thea, I can start and just do a quick update on shelter and then pass it over to you for all of the meteor updates. Really excited to say that the congregate RFP was released on Friday, and we are currently soliciting for a scatter site model, and that represents a shift in the way that we have operated shelter through the municipality. So very excited to see that RFP on the street. Please share alike, let people know. The RFP allows for a bidder to solicit, to submit a solicitation in one of three buckets: as a vendor providing service, with a location only, or as a vendor with location. We hope to really have a robust group of vendors that are bidding on this solicitation. This RFP is quite significantly different in that this shelter season, this RFP represents year-round shelter. We are looking at a scatter site model up to 3 locations, and the locations will have capacity, surge capacity, which is very different, with a baseline of 200 individuals served, and during the winter months, the ability to flex up to 400. That is very different than what we've offered in the past, but what we are really trying to do is to make sure that we recognize the difference in people seeking shelter during the winter months and building that into our current capacity. We will be releasing a non-congregate RFP later this month. What will be different about that, not only just the timing in both of these RFPs moving forward, which gives us a significant amount of runway before winter hits, but we are only going to solicit for up to 100 non-congregate beds. And that is also a stark difference from what we've done in the past, where we really added that capacity through using hotels and other locations. We are also adding a focus in our non-congregate on some of the individuals that are most vulnerable. We had a lot of lessons learned from this shelter season and understanding that we have a fairly large number of folks that come in that are fragile, and they really require an increase in time to connect them to other services. And so this just allows us to really lean into that. Also, with the congregate RFP, we're really looking at a service-rich model. This is a bit of a paradigm change because in the past, we, the municipality, have leaned into the space of life, health, and safety. So services were ramped up to make sure that people didn't die during the winter, and then they ramped down. This, looking at the lens of a year-round capacity, is what are we doing for those individuals when they walk through the door? And that really requires increased touch points with connection, building relationship, understand that someone is just not immediately going to be ready, but embedding in the RFP and the expectation with a goal is that we are really linking individuals to services and moving them through the system. So I'm excited to see what we have come through the door in these solicitations, and just, recognizing that it's a pivot. It's something every year I think we're going to do better and better based on the feedback that we receive, understanding the need, and then being able to pivot and work with our partners to accomplish that. So grateful for everyone that has provided service, that's constantly giving us feedback on where there are implementation challenges, and I'll pause there for questions.
Thank you, Karina. One thing I would just like to mention and point out is I really appreciate the emphasis on a scattered site model. I think we've tried in Anchorage multiple times to try and see how many people can we get under one roof. We've seen multiple iterations of that over the years. And, my friend from Fairview here has experienced some of that as well. So really appreciate moving towards the smaller scattered site model that's hopefully going to, and as we've seen in other places, but hopefully this will lead to more manageable services and better outcomes and less far less neighborhood impact. I did want to ask about for the RFP it's in putting a shelter in a location via RFP. Maybe this isn't like a fully formed thought, but what kind of community engagement is expected, or do you foresee happening about awarding a building owner or an operator that, talking with the community or the neighborhood, that we have awarded this person that owns a building in your area a shelter contract? Because previously that has really been the rub about putting a shelter anywhere. And there has generally been a lot more community conversation about the location of a shelter before it's funded or before it's created. And this sort of seems like there's going to be a response to the RFP, and it could potentially be awarded, and then the shelter is going to show up, wherever the address for that successful bidder is going to be operating. But I'm just thinking about that, and that could be challenging for the operator and challenging for that to that neighborhood as well. So I'm wondering if there's been thought or discussion about that and the whole like, oh no, now there's going to be a shelter in my neighborhood and I've had no input.
I can take a stab at that, Farina.
I think what I heard, because for some reason, again, when you talk this, it's very crackly. But I think what I heard most of what you say is basically how are we prepared for NIMBY? And how are we going to kind of build those bridges for folks that say we don't want another shelter in our community? Yeah, we expect that people are not going to want a shelter. We understand that that has, for many people, a negative connotation, and the idea of the scatter site model with a smaller, and I failed to say this, but it's in the RFP. A bidder can also identify a particular population so that we can really be very thoughtful about who we serve and just engaging and addressing the community that on the one hand, we know that people have and need a place to go. We know that the mass shelter has proven to be incredibly ineffective in doing linkage and moving people. So how do we, through this model with a scatter site, say we are just not going to concentrate these set of services in one community? The idea is that we are looking very broadly across all of Anchorage, and there's not going to be one singular answer, one magic wand that's going to make one community feel more comfortable about it than the other. But we will stand alongside the vendor and say that this is what we, the Muni, support. Thea, I think you had started to speak.
Yeah, I guess part of another aspect of this that's different than what we've been doing is that these will be year-round shelters. So in the RFP, you'll read that whoever is proposing will need to enter into the licensing process. So that also requires that community engagement that you're speaking to. And so, and of course, it also then requires that you're selecting sites that are zoned for this use. So we're really relying on the processes that are already part of the municipality that are, kind of governed or overseen by the health department, and that many operators are already familiar with. But I think that new operators could also read those requirements, kind of check out that process, and hopefully that provides a level of guidance and engagement with the community that will help communities be welcoming, because I think the reality is that we do have shelters in lots of different parts of our community, and many of them operate without that much disruption to the surrounding area. So I think that's, is what gives us confidence that this approach could work. And, with having multiple sites, some of them could be quite small. You could have one that operates 50 beds year round and maybe has capacity to go to 75, as a surge capacity. So that's what we're asking bidders to tell us, is kind of what would be your year round kind of baseline, and then what could you add in order to help when we have an increase in need over certain times of the year. So we're trying to create a more flexible model, but that also fits in with existing processes like our licensing process, because that's another thing that's hard about the way we've been doing shelter is, emergency shelter isn't subject to those processes because it's time limited. So, and then the other thing that Brina was talking about, it being a service-rich environment, we're really looking to operators who are experienced with delivering behavioral health services and other billable services that can help bring that revenue into the operations. Because part of what we're facing, as you all know, is we really can't afford to continue doing the number of beds that we've been doing when the Muni covers the whole cost. And we know that we want to do as much as we can to meet the need. And so we really need operators to start bringing in billable revenue to help support some of those costs. So that's another thing that we'll be looking for in this current RFP and in the non-congregate one that's not out yet. Again, it'll be, we're thinking around 100 beds, but we're curious to see what the pricing comes out at, and that those would also be year round. And again, because they're serving high vulnerability folks, we would be excited to see bidders who could bring billable services to that operation.
Thank you.
And I put the link in the chat for those of you who are on Teams.
As the shelters, more and more shelter space comes on and there's more and more capacity available, does the city have a plan on how to deal with individuals that choose to not interact with the shelters?
I mean, we're pursuing the same strategy that we've been, pursuing since the LaFrance administration came on, which is we're continuing to abate camps and do a lot of outreach. So, our approach is really around outreach, engagement, abatement, as resources allow and as areas are prioritized according to our municipal process. And then what we're really trying to do is create the options that are inviting to people. So, for example, Farina hasn't talked yet about designated parking, but that's something we're trying to lift over the summer months so that if you're car camping, you can have a safe place to go. We're also interested in we have a project trying to develop some micro units and use that type of kind of low barrier structure in order to also facilitate some recovery residences. So we're trying to create different options. That's also the reason we want to do these multiple sites with potentially serving specific populations. So we're just trying to decrease the barriers as much as we possibly can. And then we'll have to continue with abatement and cleaning in order to make public spaces welcoming for everybody.
And I want to directly, say this, that a lot of people don't support abatement. There's a lot of contention around that we are just displacing individuals. I want to reiterate that it is not a matter of that we just want to displace folks. An aspect of this that we can't ignore is that if there is a homeless encampment that's directly in front of your house and it's been there for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, at what point have you hosted your unhoused neighbors and they're on public lands? Are they allowed to just be there because they choose not to engage in services or because there's just not enough shelter beds? And so we have to deal with that tension between understanding the experience of the person with lived experience, but also understanding the community and being able to respond to that, to say that, it is not just a matter of, well, it's only 20 people or it's only 5 people that we are going to abate. That has been some of the language that the administration has used when the mayor was campaigning and when she came into office. That is something that is going to continue according to code. And we are right now trying to really flood the system with rapid rehousing dollars so that we're creating that movement so that individuals that are currently in any of our shelter space that are high on the CE list can all get connected to housing services so that we've got that movement in the system. But it would be unfair and unrealistic of me to say that there are individuals that don't want to be inside. There are individuals that just want to camp. They are not ready to take that next step for whatever reason. We will continue to work with our partners at the coalition for outreach, but we will continue to abate. They will continue to have those contacts that often people don't like to have. That's why they choose to be outside. And we will try to have as much fairness, engagement, and respect for those individuals. But we also have to recognize that we just can't have camps all over Anchorage. We can't have our parks and our greenbelt spaces where we have the community ad nauseum saying that they feel unsafe going out into their own parks. And so how do we balance that with ensuring that we are linking people who are ready to engage in that service, but also being as transparent and forthright for those other individuals that choose not to come inside, that we will continue to abate. And it's not the most satisfying answer, but it's what the process is.
It
I
seems
think
like,
one other just thing I
Right.
want to add about abatement is that what we also see is that when camps stay in the same place for longer, they tend to become more and more unsafe. So in terms of fire, in terms of violence, we had somebody killed in Davis Park recently. In terms of other types of criminal activity, such as drug dealing. So that's another reason why abatement is important, because it gives this kind of intensive opportunity for people to like see some other options and potentially take them. So that's why we try and do that outreach and engagement every time that we're planning an abatement, so that there's this intensive effort to help people connect as that location where they've been staying is disrupted.
It does seem a bit like you're chasing your tail with abatement, and I know it's frustrating for everybody. We had a camp in front of Dempsey Anderson for 6 months. That was abated a few weeks ago. Everybody moved 100 yards down the street. Now they're sitting there between Northern Lights and Benson, where there was a fire last summer in that spot. And I think there was an explosion of some propane tanks. There was a fire in front of Dempsey Anderson, but 2 fires, I think, last summer in front of Dempsey Anderson. So it seems like it's shuffling the problem around, and then you're going to have to abate the same people kind of over and over again. And I know it's a frustration for Parks and Rec, and it's a big expense, too, to go through that multiple times. So I'm just wondering.
But I want to address what you're saying. It technically isn't the same people. I think that's also a misconception. So we actually, before we abated Dempsey, and we got down to, we actually emptied out the camp. We got everyone moved inside, and we just didn't have the resources to get healthy spaces there to clean out all of the tents. And it wasn't an abatement. We had outreach that worked. I believe at that time there were 6 tents, which represented about 11 people. We were able to get all of those folks inside into either congregate and non-congregate. We didn't have healthy spaces, just didn't have the bandwidth to get there and get the encampment cleaned up and get all the tents taken down and get all the trash out. 2 days later, we had people moving into the abandoned camp. So then we actually had to post abatement, which was a 10-day notice of abatement. And then we got everything cleaned out after that, but it wasn't the same people. And so I think that's also some parts of this kind of misconception, is the way that people move around, that often we are getting people that are moving through, but it's really hard to articulate that to the public, because all you see is that we abated and that it looked like it's the same 6 or 12 people that just moved across the street. We are moving 3 or 4, will go into our system, will get connected to services, and it is just a very hard story to share and to tell, because what the community sees is, oh, they just moved across the street. So I want to acknowledge what you're saying is absolutely valid, but also the other side that we see, which makes, again, kind of the tension of what we do hard, because we know that we can connect people to services, but the perception in the community is kind of this whack-a-mole.
Yeah,
And then the
I'm sure
spot between, oh, sorry.
that popped up at the same time it was abated. But yeah, okay.
And we are tracking the spot that you're describing off of Lois between Northern Lights and Benson. That is a state right of way, so we can't go in there and do that in the same way, or we need to work with them. So we are tracking that, and APD's having those conversations. So we haven't lost sight of that situation. We're still working.
A question about that space, because that space was where the fire was last summer, and then I actually called state right away last summer on that and spoke to the supervisor over there, and they said they wouldn't do it without the city. So they need partnership with the city. They need to work with the community before they're willing to go into those spaces. So you coordinate with them when you have an issue on it right away, and work together to abate that or to clear that area.
Yeah, so we did that process along New Seward. So where New Seward and Tudor crosses, and then on the opposite side of the highway at 36. And there were a few other locations actually at that time along Benson and between Benson and Northern Lights, closer to Latouche. So we did work with the state. That was a few months ago that all that work happened kind of at the beginning of winter. And so we need to kind of work through that same process with them again for that location you're talking about.
Thanks, Steve. It's just kind of shift, but what's the goal for how many beds we want to ramp up next winter?
We're trying to have 200 year-round congregate beds with the capacity to get up to 400 for the colder months of the year. And that's what we're kind of doing our funding estimates based on. And it really does depend what we get back from the bids. And then for the non-congregate, we have secured some state money that we think could give us about 100 non-congregate beds for the remainder of 2025 as we ramp down the ones we're paying for currently. But we're also trying to secure some additional funding for 2026. So, and again, depending on the cost of the bed, we could either, do it for a longer period of time or more beds or less beds. So we kind of have to see what we get with the RFPs.
And does that doesn't include solid waste services? Or is solid waste services still transitioning out?
Yeah, our goal is to ramp that down. Again, depending on the bids we get back, our goal is to bring on our new sites as we decompress 56th Avenue.
So we'll have a net loss of some beds next winter. Sounds like.
Well, we have a couple other projects. We're trying to kind of keep pretty similar to what we've had in the winter, with actually a few more in the summer. So that's what we're shooting for. But again, it depends kind of what bids we get back and what the costs come in at.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else from commissioners or from Fran and Thea?
I have one question, and this might be not on anyone's radar quite yet, but obviously we're anticipating kind of a bad potential fire year coming up. Is there anyone talking about what that might look like with some of these camps, especially once people start going back outside? I know some people that are pretty concerned, especially with Davis Park, but then the ones that pop up along the trails.
Yep, AFD, sorry, right now is working on a community wildfire prevention and mitigation plan. And they are working, actually, we just heard a short presentation earlier today at the Public Health and Safety Committee meeting. They're working with federal partners and also with our Office of Emergency Management to really prepare for this this fire season, both, kind of the parts of Anchorage that you might think of that interface with the Chugach, but also in, areas that are wooded in town. So yeah, they're reporting out on that monthly at that committee meeting.
And I can tell you from a practical perspective, it is something that we talk about during we kind of have a convening where we weekly talk about abatement. And that is something that has come up, is really just understanding. In previous years, there was a fire out on Campbell Creek that burned in 19 and then another in 2022. So you will hear us talk more about what and how we'll be strategically looking at abatements in areas that have a higher fire danger. It's no surprise to anyone on this call. We just have a number of camps. People are frequently moving, but really ensuring that we're just kind of keeping the city safe and getting people from those deep wooded areas that, if they spark and go up, becomes much harder to have an AFD response. So it's going to be our job to make sure that we're getting those abated as a priority throughout the spring and summer.
Thank you.
Can I just make two other updates? So one, the health department right now is in the middle of negotiating to get a pretty big chunk of rental assistance money out to grantees and out on the street. So we should be getting the first batch of those to the assembly on March 18th. And then, as we get the other awards negotiated, they'll be coming soon after. So what we're hoping is that starting in April, we have quite a bit of rental assistance funding. It's not very long term. It only goes through the end of September. But we are really encouraging those grantees to focus on people who are either unsheltered or in emergency shelter, to help them find housing instead of obviously just, not having a place to go. if their shelter bed is closing. So that's something the health department's been putting a lot of really great effort into. And we're excited to work with a group of grantees and kind of bring them together and help them coordinate with each other to really move folks out of shelter this spring. So that's actually $4.2 million that will kind of expire at the end of September. And then there's an additional 1.5 that will have a longer time frame. So that'll be both rental assistance plus services funding that's in the process of being awarded. Michelle?
Michelle, you're muted. Unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me
A little bit, very faintly.
now? Okay, I will try to, are you aware of how many permanent supportive housing or, temporary or permanent supportive housing are available and how much is needed to support individuals to get to that next step from congregate shelters?
I mean, I think there's very few of our PSH beds that are available. So this is really more of that approach, more like what the veterans do, where it's helping people get into rental housing and then layering on the supports. Does that answer the question, Michelle? Yeah. But I hope that South Central Foundation will be, I hope these grantees will be in touch with you because I'm sure that you have services that would be beneficial. Any other thoughts or questions on that?
One from the audience, sir?
Yes. Is the municipality, are they going to require a good neighbor agreement, for these the vendors and for the scattered site, locations?
Yeah, that's part of what. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I would just say if they're subject to shelter licensing, then absolutely that would be part of the shelter licensing process to have a good neighbor agreement in place. Anything else? Yeah.
Just very quickly, last announcement is that the mayor's office, the Housing and Homelessness Committee chairs, and the coalition are teaming up to do a 2-day summit. Anchorage's coordinated response to homelessness. And I'll put the link in the chat. But the first day is March 20th. That's a Thursday. South Central Foundation is hosting this summit for 2 days at its NUCA Institute. And on the first day, it'll be probably more focused on providers. That's really focuses on coordinated entry, hosted mostly by the coalition. And then the second day is really the mayor's office and the assembly co-chairs and the coalition and a bunch of community partners. So we're really encouraging people to come, share their ideas. We're going to have a big World Cafe during the lunch period where we have lots of different providers, creating the opportunity for people to engage with them and figure out how they can be part of the solution. So I'll put the link in the chat, and it would be wonderful to see you all there. And I think, David, you want to speak to what, aren't you representing the HAND Commission there?
The HAND Commission will be hosting a table at World Cafe about how to engage people in the public process, and I would invite other commissioners to join me at that event. So I'm not there all by my lonesome. So, yeah, information in the chat. And I saw Eric also had a. Yeah, I think so. I mean, Alan asked a question. You can.
So we're winding down the winter during which congregate, non-congregate, and warming centers were at capacity pretty much every night all winter, which is another way of saying the system wasn't at sufficient scale to meet the demand in the community. Do we have an estimate of what a system that was big enough to meet the demand of the community would have been? How many beds were missing this winter to help inform plans for next winter?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that's something that looking at community data, we had this kind of on our list in December. We had 475 by folks that were reported to be sheltered. So I think there is definitely recognition that the system that was in place this winter doesn't quite meet the need. And the goal is to get everybody inside. And I think it's also a question of the number of shelter beds that would be ideal and the amount of resources that are there to support that. But I think as a member of the public, coming here and advocating for a system that accounts for everybody, is something that we can absolutely put on record as a want and a need from people that are participating. So thank you. All right, I also just want to recognize we have 2 presentations, and we are at 4. We have 40 minutes left, so I'll leave it to the guy that showed up late to keep us on time. But wanted to move on to Jed, a quick update on community safety and development and ongoing request for grant proposals.
Okay, yeah. I can give a quick update. We had covered some of this. Can you hear me okay, or should I move closer to the mic?
Probably move closer.
Yeah, okay.
But not too close.
Not too close. Okay, I'm going to try to curse the chair here. Can you hear me now? Or no?
Sorry, were you asking us if we were done?
No, I was asking if you could hear me, but maybe apparently not. Why don't you come over
Yeah, I think it's when someone's right there,
It's-
it's really broken up, but it's much easier to hear you when you're down the table.
Yeah,
We'll try it down the table. Okay, how's that?
better.
Okay. So yeah, I'm Jed Goulet, Community Systems Program Manager for the HHAND Department. We have 3 different request for grant proposals in various stages that I can give updates on. Actually moving quite quickly along with a bunch of these, really. The first one is the housing acquisition one that we put out back in the fall. That one, we selected 2 recommended proposals. The Cook Inlet Baxter housing acquisition and the Habitat for Humanity restore relocation. The Cook Inlet project, and so the assembly on March 18th will be hearing and hopefully approving the substantial amendments that reallocated that funding and the agreement for Cook Inlet for Baxter acquisition, so that we can step in there and be able to actually give that money out to Cook Inlet to acquire that parcel. The Habitat for Humanity project, we don't yet have the final agreement with Habitat, so we're still in negotiation phase for that. But yeah, we're moving very close to completion. The got put onto the laid on the table yesterday at this meeting. Thank you, Leah, for helping getting that done. And they set it for hearing on budget. So it's moving forward. Additionally, the supportive services RFGP, we are moving very quickly to allocate both home ARP funding and the emergency rental assistance funding that Thea mentioned through that process, and we have gotten to a final agreement with a couple of those grantees, and we're working on getting some more of those tomorrow so that we can get those also onto the March 18th assembly agenda, so that those can be approved and we can start rolling out rental assistance in April. That's the rental assistance that is only good through September, so we really need to get it going quickly. It's a big chunk of money that has to be spent fast, and so that's been a major focus this week and last week in getting those. So we are moving forward with that, and then we have a third request for grant proposals that is active now that went out last week. Is due March 27th. We had a pre-proposal conference today with the purchasing department for that. And this is to allocate capital funding for the 2025 Community Development Block Grant. It's very exciting because it's the first time in quite a few years that we are on track to get our HUD money allocated within the same calendar year that it is being awarded. We almost made it last year, not quite. This is getting on a new time frame where we will have requests for grant proposals in advance of doing our action plan each year, so that we can have specific projects identified and approved by HUD and roll them out without having to do amendments to the action plans. So we are expecting to get about $800,000 for capital projects through CDBG this year. They haven't made the actual allocations yet, so that's not exact. That's just an estimate, but we are soliciting applications. So if people have applications for housing or shelter, is what we're focusing on there. CDBG can't do construction of new housing, so the housing side of that would probably be either acquisition of land or buildings for conversion to housing, or possibly some kind of renovations or hotel conversions, like that. Or shelter construction or renovation, something like that. The focus here is on increasing the supply of housing units and or shelter beds on a permanent basis. So that's what that is. Deadline is March 27th, so if people have ideas or people with projects that might be interested in receiving some funding, go ahead and apply. This is now online. The Purchasing Department has a new Bid Express system. Bid Express is the name of the platform. And then we have an account on there as a municipality. And so this is for the first time an actual online system that you can use to apply even there. Purchasing Department. I'm sure many of you who have experience with our grant programs will be about that. So anyway, you can find that on the purchasing website. We have a link to Bid Express there, and you can find us. 2025. So yeah, those are my updates. Any quick questions?
What's the Habitat restore?
They're moving their restore from its current location in the Tideway Mall to, it was going to be the Speedy Glass building, although apparently that is maybe fallen through that sales. So they are going to be looking for other locations. But basically the idea is that they're going to acquire a building that they own, so they wouldn't have to be paying commercial rents for the restore.
They don't know.
Not yet, no. That they had kind of a tentative agreement with the Speedy Glass building, but it sounds like they've decided that after looking more closely, that's probably a small location. Yeah, it is a lot. It would be a lot smaller.
Thank you. Next thing on the agenda, Jessica Parks is in Juneau, so okay with commissioners. I mean, she gave us a printout. I just asked commissioners to look at that for questions next week. We do have, before we get into presentations, I just want to do a quick time check question. Is there anybody here who's for public comment? I want to make sure we have time for that at the end if anyone is here for public comment. No, okay. About how much time do you need for your presentation?
How much time do I have?
We have 32 minutes. How much time do you need for your presentation?
Just a few minutes, we're going to cover most of that.
Okay. Alan, 20 minutes.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay. So good, everybody? Yeah. So, and I see we are being joined by another individual. Sheree Williams.
Yes.
How are you? Good to see you. Turn over to Alan Kaplan, Fairview Rabble Rouser.
So, thank you very much, members of the HHAND Commission for granting me time to come and make this presentation. And the I talked initially about this and about interest in talk about shadows, and density in shadows. Because you're going to have affordable housing, you have to increase density, right? In order to make cost out. And increased density is also going to produce additional shadow, right? And that shadows is a negative externality for someone else. So that's what the thing that we're going to talk about. one of the things I wanted to talk about was the fair, and what it means to be a fair viewer. And so, we connected failure, but we're working hard to do a good job. Can you advance the slide? So, so this was original failure. This is back in the early 60s. You can see that that's Gamble Street and the white lower white line, 15th Avenue. And so you can see that Fairview, it was a cohesive place, right? And Gamble Street was a main street. Fairview, you had East Fairview, you had West Fairview, and it connected by Gamble Street and at the main street. And the image there showing the neighborhood pride. We had Gamble Street, and 8th Avenue, and then Fairview, Alaska. So there's always been a strong sense of neighborhood, identity. Next slide, please. This changed, in 1965, the plan they explicitly pointed out, that when they put in the couplet, it was going to do some serious damage, and was acknowledged, and in fact, that's exactly what happened. So when they put in that, took a residential street, which was Acre Street, and converted it into a major arterial, it created this wasteland, 2 blocks by, at least 10 blocks long. So next slide, please. So we've tried over the years various efforts and initiatives to kind of improve the corridor, to make kind of make it better. One of the things was we put in plans, some of the plans we believe back in 2014 put in this tax incentive proposed. We put that in place. It was passed. It's still active, but we haven't seen it effective. People have really not really taken advantage of it, and so we still burdened by that legacy of the road, the couplet that's in there, and the couplet and DOT and what they've done is they created this sort of a great deal of uncertainty, for what's DOT going to do along the corridor. And it's what we've been working on is, next slide please, is building a new vision. And you have in your packet, an example, kind of a summary, of a reconnected Fairview of what we're doing. I think it's important. But one of the key things, that's relevant to the agenda item is the Winter City Design Guidelines, right? So I think this is important, and this is something that we do not really have a sense of.
Now we're gonna have you come down to the end of the table where people can actually hear. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Well. One of the things that we put into our proposal, this is a nationally competitive grant, we got it. Was the finalization of our Winter City Design Guidelines, and Winter City Design Guidelines. What is that? This is something that we don't recognize. Next slide, please. So this is what we're looking for north, right? It's the and the southern pole north is the northernmost part of the Earth, including the Arctic and the subarctic regions. Next slide, please. Another big quote, from this Finnish, back in 1946. That winter is a true season of the North. Spring is only a promise that something great is about to happen. Summer is an illusion of what people during some hot days or weeks at the most believe to be true. Autumn means death. It is the dark grave of the promises of the spring and of the illusions of the summer. But winter is something that really exists. Winter, it never deceives. It always comes back. So, this is Finland is a word. Helsinki, Finland. We're about the same latitude as Helsinki, Finland. So, so we are at, next slide, please. So, I mean, we recognize that this is something that we're different, right? So life at 61.2 degrees north latitude, right? It means that we have to live with the presence of, really, domineering shadows, like darkness, right? And it's not like the quiet shadows of the lower 48, but these are, normal shadows. And shadows have an influence, they have an effect on people. And, next slide, please. So why do we have such extreme shadows, right? Well, Earth has a tilt, right? As it rotates, so it's not a straight top, right? It's tilted at 23.5 degrees as it circles the sun. So that extremes of light, that's when we have Earth is tilted towards the sun. That's the summer solstice, right? As everyone loves the summer, the long days, the wonderful things you can do. But we also have on the other side, the extremes of dark, where the Earth is tilted away from the sun. Next slide, please. So what does this do? This creates a duality in subatomic life, right? Of how we, live up here, right? And it's like a shadow. It's a natural part of life. Between the light and the dark, and this relationship between light and dark, where the shadow is, it's a core aspect of subatomic living. Next slide, please. So shadow spaces, they have an important impact on the quality of life for one living in a subarctic location, right? Shadow space has low ambient temperatures in areas where the sun is influenced, and shadow space must be balanced with light space. Right. Next slide, please. So the design issue. So the future is anchored both. It's increased urban density, right? That means taller buildings, greater mass, larger site footprint, and such development blocks the sun and creates more intense shadow spaces. Right? And without mitigation, the shadows will be deep, foreboding, and cause a person to feel a sense of unease and degrade a person's, health. Next slide, please. Well, when I say degrade a person's health, what am I talking about? Right? It's seasonal affective disorder. Right? This is real. Right? It can adversely, impact a person. It's often referred to as kind of weird, fever, and it peaks in February, of each winter. And these characters, 8%, I believe this is anchor-specific research, 8% of our general population, is significantly affected by the darkness, by the loss of the light, right? So we have a population of 280,000 people, right? So that's like about 25,000 people, right? That are significantly impacted. So, and when people are significantly impacted, what happens? They get depressed, right? They lose productivity drops down, right? Our vibrancy, our excitement, our interest in engaging, what's going on around us drops. So it's really important to be addressing this. So how can we address this? You have to deal with the shadow spaces, right? You have to accept that they have an impact on who we are as people of the far north, right? And we have some solutions that we can take to this, right? You can have, we can go in and say, well, listen, let's have translucent buildings, right? They can incorporate designs that allow for more of that natural sunlight to come through, particularly in the critical spots on a site where there's solar space, where we want a sun pocket, right? Because we want people to gather, right? We want to protect that. So that's gathering in those solar spaces. That's what builds society, right? That's how people come together and they converse. They build community, right? And that's what we wanted to do. We want to build that sense of community for all incomes. Next slide, please. This impact is color, right? Color can be used in a strategic way to back up shadow space, right? And we're all affected by color. When you're feeling blue, right? When you're green with envy, right? When you see red, our language and the words, they reflect our relationship with the color. And so but if you look at our city, if you look at our neighborhoods, does our urban spaces, do they reflect like a vibrancy? What do they reflect? Right? There's a lot of grayness. A lot of grayness. Right? It creates great people. And that's not the type of thing, and when somebody is struggling with some of the challenges of life, if your physical environment is dominated by greatness, it makes it much more difficult for that person to lift themselves up, take advantage of the services, and to move up the ladder to self-sufficiency. This is the reason to bring this up, but this is actually related to our homeless situation, right? When people drop down into that level, they're impacted by their natural environment. And if the natural environment is not conducive for them to be lifted up, they're more likely to stay down. Right? So it's important for us to be thinking about how do we create a more livable, more vibrant, winter city. Next slide, please. So, one of the things that we're looking at things from a new approach, right? So Anchorage, Anchorage is the only major metropolitan on the North American continent located in the subarctic, circumpolar north region of Earth. We're the only one, right? That means, that means that we're unique, right? We have a unique set of circumstances, and so we don't recognize that. We don't accept that the fact that we are unique, right? Our location. And so what we want to do is, as we move on, is acknowledge that uniqueness, right? With our approach, with our the form-based code, regulating land use development, and with our inner city, design guidelines, dealing with the explicit with the shadows, and density as it occurs. Let's do it in a creative way, right? Where it adds to the vibrancy of our life. Next slide, please. So, place to begin, revitalization of the global inward corridor, right? This provides a test bed for a new type of urban design, a new approach, right? And with what we're doing is moving toward our inner city design guidelines. Coming out, we're advancing an innovation area in design. Right? We're trying to create an innovation ecosystem, and with a community fabrication lab, with STEAM emphasis at our school, and we're promoting the development of the marina district, around the Sullivan Arena and the sports complex down there, and Gamble Street. Eventually, we hope we transform that back into what it was originally, which was our main street. And one of the key projects that we're going to kind of advance and jumpstart it all is the Fairview Greenway, right? As a capital project, and what it does is this we're voting, along the Hyder Street, that 2-block, 10-block, wide, 10-block long, dead zone, right? What we want to do is we need something to fix it up, to make it, to turn it around. So what we will do, the urban core, right? You got 20 miles coastal trail on the west. You got Chester Creek Greenbelt on the south. You got Ship Creek Greenbelt on the north. And what we're proposing, is the Fairview Greenway along Hyder Street on the east to connect it all, right? To connect make a loop, a bike pedestrian beltway around the urban core. It brings the urban core, together, right? And this is the type of investment, that will revitalize, this a neighborhood that's really been subjected to a lot of institutional bias for decades, and it's a way for us to fix it. Next slide. So the commission, what can you guys do? What you can do is, first off, include neighborhood development, right, in the consolidated plan. It's not, I know housing and homelessness are important issues, right? But neighborhood development is also important. And this is what this commission, that ND part of this commission is all about, neighborhood development. commission members, could see that and then request that staff, include that type of language, in the consolidated plan and start to move, start to transition, right, to, thinking more about how do we create more vibrant neighborhoods? How do we revitalize these areas, particularly low-income, people, right? So what we'd like, if at all possible, that as we move forward with, our efforts to create, put back the dark, right? And bring more light, and vibrancy, into the area, into the east downtown, at the part of our community. We need to build support. We need to be able to document that. Municipal organizations, municipal commissions, they say, this is a good idea. We support this. The HAND Commission, because of your mission statements, right? You're charged with your neighborhood revitalization. Very important. It's important for you guys to understand what we're trying to do and how we can build a more livable, a more vibrant, and unique submarine community together. And because I think we can get there. But we need your support. And also, as individuals, I hope you guys can participate in our process. So we're getting started for the rest of this year and into 2026. We're going to be having a series of workshops and talking about a lot of the issues and the challenges that are related in one form or the other to what this commission deals with on a regular basis. So I think that by participating, bringing your voices and participating in our process, you can help strengthen the product that comes out of it. And so I'm just making a pitch, and that's my spiel. So next slide. So reflective peer review. We're trying to get quick. In order for us to move forward, to overcome the legacy of the past, we have to create. We have to rewrite the narrative. We have to create a new narrative, a new sense of what this part of town is going to be, and that's what we want to do. Right? And we want to do it, pushing back the dark, getting rid of the shadows. We can accept the density because the urban core density is going to come, but let's do it in a thoughtful way, strategic way that acknowledges the reality of where we're at 61.2 degrees North latitude on this planet, and let's create a city that we can be proud of that sparkles. Anyway, that's what I'm advocating for sparkling, increased sparkling. So anyway, so that's it. And I didn't take that long, I don't think. So
18. Yeah, you crushed it.
If you guys have any,
a little bit of time for questions.
The Winter City Design Guidelines, is that like a one single thing, or does each city that adopts that kind of a little bit to fix for their specific location?
Each city does it a little bit differently because they have different characteristics. If you look at like Edmonton in Canada, Calgary, they sort of northern sort of prairies and get really intense cold, and so they have lots of winds, heavy winds. So their characteristics and their design attributes are unique to the challenges that they face, and they also have a little bit of lower latitude. Right? So, for ours is going to be different. Ours is going to be crafted, that reflect our particular set of unique circumstances. And we'll follow some the darkness, and the shadows, and the this is an important issue that we're going to have to wrestle with. How can we? Because the intent is, how do we create a vibrant city all year round? Right? And it's just like housing, providing shelter for housing. Right? It's taking a long time for people to realize, hey, let's have a plan for year-round housing, right? Instead of just thinking about, episodic, right? And no, you have to think about the entire year, right? And how do we? You want to have a good system, a good months, but also the dark months. And we're going to bring them together in a whole. And that's what the idea of the city design guidelines are. That's what we hope to do, is make our winter as interesting, as enjoyable, and as vibrant as our summers.
Alan, thank you. We hope we're staying engaged, and if there is an opportunity for the HAND Commission to weigh in on something specific, please let us know.
I will. And the HAND Commission, I just want to reiterate, this is an opportunity for you guys to do something. Participate in something that really builds a new and positive place within our community. Take a part of our community that always thought as a bad place, right? And turn it around, and make it a neighborhood of choice. That's what you guys can do. Hope you guys are up to it. Well, that's all right. We just want you to work with us. All right, thanks.
All right. Taylor, thank you for hanging in with us. So we have Layla Taylor with the Cambridge Health Department. New to the health department, relatively, maybe a month and a half or so.
Tomorrow is 2 months.
So the Housing Services Division Manager.
Yes.
And you're here to sort of talk a little bit about some of the work the health department has been doing, more specifically with ECWS. So Marina and Thea are kind of seeing it from a very high level, or 10,000 foot, and you're kind of more
Closer to the ground.
closer to the ground.
Well, I will apologize now. This is as much voice as I've got left, but it's substantially more than I had a week ago, so I'll take it. So for the updates that I had, Dan Fredo went over the bulk of them. The only thing I would add is that the housing services team has put in place they go work through working on policies and procedures. That is the team, but also Catholic Social Services, MASH, and HINNING, because well, we can think something is a grand idea on paper and say, yeah, that's fabulous, but then go to implement it and discover this is a bad idea, this is not working. And so part of trying to get ahead of that is looking to people that are kind of at the forefront for delivering services to our unhoused population. Because while the team goes out and does things, they're not having that as much direct interaction as the staff that they'll congregate in the non-congregate shelters. So we're hoping to make some improvements to the current policies and procedures we have, but also be able to improve them as we move forward with our RFPs and updated policies and procedures as those come out. Looking at some of the things like transportation and entering in data and things like that. So it's a way to make sure that everybody's kind of working together and it's not just one person saying, here's what we want you to do and not gathering feedback, because that does not work.
Yeah, just to, if I may, to educate commissioners here a little bit. When the RFP goes out, there's a contract that says you need to do all of these things, right? And then in that contract, it also references municipal congregate and non-congregate shelter policies and procedures that were created, and this is an opportunity for the health department to work closely with people that are executing those policies and procedures and refine those. And it's been, it's as you sort of truth test something that may have seemed like a good idea when it was being put on paper, but when it's rolled out into an environment, these policies and procedures may have been written in the context of the Sullivan Arena, and that may not translate well to East 56 or to one of the congregate shelters, the non-congregate shelters. I'm not sure exactly what you're on. So, I really appreciate the health department's commitment to sort of that continuous quality improvement of the policies and procedures and making sure that they're making sense. So it's been a really good example. collaboration and drawing on the subject matter experts that we have.
We are happy to put it all together, but as stated, we are not the experts in everything, so it makes the most sense for us to work with the people who are on the ground in the facilities doing the hands-on piece. So the only other couple things I have is hot meals are happening. One hot meal is happening with both the congregate and the non-congregate shelters. So at least once every guest in there is getting a hot meal if they want. They obviously have the option to say no thanks. But from what I've heard and all the feedback I've gotten, that piece is good. We've also gotten a lot of really positive feedback on the third-party oversight that happens with Kathleen and Emily going in and doing the town hall meetings and getting kind of that open feedback from the guests staying in the facilities, that it's not, they're not having to, they're able to tell what's going on and what's not going on with somebody who doesn't work for the municipality or who doesn't work for the shelter itself, so they're that unbiased third party.
We could, for a future meeting, we can look at inviting them, as sort of reinvent services.
I would love that.
Yeah.
They're great. Kathleen is a wealth of information.
Kathleen's last name?
And I speak with them pretty regularly.
The last update I have is that there's a memorandum of agreement. It's also been referred to as a professional services agreement, and it's a form that any community agency can complete and submit to be able to go and provide services within one of the shelter locations. So, for example, if the VA wanted to go in and work with any veterans who happen to be in the shelter to get them set up on benefits or start that process, they would fill out that form, submit it, then our grants and contracts team would meet with them, make sure all of the technical paperwork is in place, and then they can set that up directly with the shelters themselves to come and provide the service. I think we've only had one come in thus far from the Covenant House. The form is relatively new, it's only been out for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. All the other updates I have for you in front of you, which my voice is very grateful for.
By Covenant House, you mean their, the crisis shelter?
It did not specify, it just said Covenant House, so, one of my team members was reaching out to them to figure out which section of that. Yeah, they just, Covenant House, that's kind of what we said, which first. Right.
Other questions?
I have a comment, really. I did read in the paper when they did the audit, I don't know if the audit or the third party came in and noticed that there were bed bug issues and laundry issues. One thing I can tell you is that it's a challenge at my buildings. The bed bugs are a challenge. I mean, people bring them in and they're a hard thing to get rid of, and by the time you notice that they're there,
They're everywhere.
they're everywhere. And it's a challenge. So it's I mean, and everybody wants to blame the building or the operator, but it's not, it's not us bringing them in. And it's a challenge to get rid of them once they are there. And then people leave and they're not treated, they don't properly take care of their things. So it's got to be a challenge. I mean, I'm sure you run through all the time.
It's definitely not an easy task. In coming from Safe Harbor, like the children years ago, that was a daily battle that I had with both of those topics.
Only 25 years ago when I started in apartments, we didn't have cockroaches, we didn't have bed bugs. Now we've got both.
That was for the person living in the land of cold, and they didn't have to deal with bugs.
Yeah.
And now that doesn't work anymore.
Well, thank you very much for being here. You'll be at future meetings as well, and so, if you want, we can put you as a standing or every other month, so we can sort of, we can chat about that offline, but do we have anyone here for general public comments? Anybody? Oh, okay. I'll move on. I just have a couple of quick commissioner comments. Reminder about the work session on the 17th for the annual report. Please, someone join me for the World Cafe, so I'm not sitting there all by myself. That is the 21st.
Yeah, it's a Friday.
That Friday. I'll send out more
And I
specific
failed to
information.
get choosing a route signed up in the timeline available, so there's a chance I'll be there.
That would be wonderful.
What time is it?
I will send some of that stuff out in an email. I don't have it off the top of my head.
I don't know that it's been announced. I don't know that there's like an itinerary for the day out yet. So.
Yeah, as that comes out, I'll post that information out to you, Commissioner. Who would love the company? That's all I have for general commissioner comments. Anything from anybody else? No, Michelle. Anything from you online?
Not here in person.
Okay. We'll appreciate you being here. Virtual anyway. I don't think we have any reports. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming. I apologize for my target. Yeah.
It's in the way, man.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks for remembering to bring it up. Yeah, what's the, sorry.